We begin today's shiur from the top line of Daf Samach Tes. The Gemara opens up with a very unusual opening where it says Tola le Rav le Rebbe Beini Chiti. In order to appreciate what that line means, we look at Rashi at the top. Tola le Rav le Rebbe Beini Chiti Sholach loi igeres shloimim. Rav sent a letter of greeting to Rebbe. Now, if a letter of greeting, one would assume he sent the letter, how are you doing, and how are the kids, and how is the family, and how is the city, and how is what, all the questions that are customary for an Igeres Shlomim. V'tola she'elo zu bein hashitim. And the following question that we'll see in the Gemara, he inserted, now literally, bein hashitim means between the lines. On the top Tosfos, we see a little more explanation. Tola le Rav le Rebbe Beini Chiti Pirush Rabbeinu Chananel Shelos Harbe Shwalo. Rav sent numerous questions to Rebbe. V'hoyu igrois tfurois zu lezu, and pieces of parchment were sewn one to the other. Ubein oisam tfiros kosav she'elo zu, and between the seams, the following question appears. Ubekuntris pirush bein hashitim v'chein omar b'yishalmi banizik and toli le beini shitaya. The Kuntris, meaning Rashi's explanation, and also the Yerushalmi explain beini chiti not between the seams but between the lines. Anyway, as I said, it's a rather unusual opening, but nevertheless, the following is the heart of the Gemara, the topic. Ho'achim sheshibdu mahu. That's the language of the question that Rav sent to Rebbe. Brothers sheshibdu. And of course, we're learning this in the context of what we discussed during our previous shiur, the rights, the financial rights that an orphan girl is a girl who's being supported from the estate left by her deceased father, that in effect her brothers inherit. Boys or males are the heirs in Jewish law. However, there are numerous rabbinic provisions entitling the girls that are part of that family prior to their marriage to also receive funding for various things. We've discussed already, for food support, for clothing, and for dowry purposes upon entrance to a marriage. So the question is a very brief question in terms of length, meaning word-wise, all it says is Oachin shibdu mahu. Havi Yosef Rabbi Chia kamei. When this question came to Rebbe, Rabbi Chia was seated there. Omar lei, Rabbi Chia asks, the word shibdu, mochru o mishkenu. What does shibdu mean? Does it mean that the brothers sold properties, and then the question is, can the girls go to the purchasers to draw their support? And again, when we say support, we're not committing ourselves to specifically what kind of support. We mentioned already a few different areas of financial interest that the girls have. Are they able to go to the purchasers? Or Mishkinu means the brothers set up the land as collateral. In other words, the fellows had borrowed money, and they gave their land as a source of collateral, source of potential collection. The topic heading on the side, where we feature the geometric form, the volcano shape that you see, are deois b'mahi koyach habas ligvois parnosu mezonus mimishibodim. We have different opinions as to what the strength of the girl is in collection of parnosa and mezonos. Mezonos is food support. Mimishubodim sheshibdu achim es hanechosim, regarding properties that the brothers had been mishabed. That's the language that Rav used in presenting his question. Another marking that will appear a little bit later, a crown shape, highlights the word E. Havlotas efshoriyot. This is to accentuate, to highlight the different possibilities that will appear. So now the first approach. Omar lei. Rebbe, in responding to Rebbe Chia, says, "My nafka mina bein mochru, bein mishkenu, whether it be a sale of the properties, whether the brothers sold off properties of their estate or they set up the properties as a form of collateral. Moitziin leparnosa v'ein moitziin lemazonos. We will collect for parnosa, and in the past we saw parnosa is associated with isur nechasim, with a tenth of the estate that the daughters are eligible to receive in anticipation of their marriage. So parnosa they're entitled to, however, not for food support. You don't seize upon properties that were sold or set up as collateral for their food support. The Gemara asks, this question lasts a couple of lines. V'Rav I mochroi komibayale. Rav asked sheshibdu, but we saw that it could mean either sold or set up as collateral. What was Rav's real interest? What was his question? If his question was mochru, then nichtov le mochru. Why doesn't he simply use the word mochru? Meaning, the original question would have read at the top line, ho'achin shem mochru mahu. If Rav was questioning what is the law if the brothers set up the land as collateral, nichtov le mashkeno. So he should have used that word. Use a clearer word in your question. Why did you use a word that has a double entendre? The Gemara answers. Notice we have a long answer here. Rav travayu komebayale. Rav was actually interested in both. V'sovar, and he figured, I'm going to use a word that covers both, because I kasivno le mochru. If in my question I ask what is the din concerning their sale of the properties, ha micha, things will be good. In other words, I'll get an answer for both. I sholach li demotziin kol shikei mishkano. If Rebbe would answer that the daughters are entitled to collect in a case of sold properties, and all the more so if the properties weren't actually sold, they're still in the possession of their brothers, just set up as collateral. However, if Rebbe would send to me ein motziin, that the bonois, the daughters, are not entitled to collect from the sold properties, akati mishkano komebayole, I still would have a doubt concerning mishkano. Namely, I can understand that girls would not be allowed to collect from sold properties, but as far as properties still in possession of the brothers that were simply set up as collateral, that I would still not know about. And I kasivno le mishkano, and had I focused my question on mishkano, would I have known about mochro? I shalach li de'ein motziin. If Rebbe would say that from collateral properties set up as a source, as an alternative form of collection for debts that the brothers had incurred, then I would say kol shikein mochro, that if the daughters cannot collect from the mishkanu, their properties that they're essentially still in possession of, certainly they would not be able to collect from sold properties. So then I would get an answer for both. However, ishalach lidat motziin, if Rebbe would answer that in the case of mishkanu, the girls are entitled to draw from them for their support, akati mochru komebayole, mochru would still be a question. As we said before, it could be that from something they're still in possession of, that they can draw from, but things that are sold, who says? That would still be a point of doubt. Therefore, echtov le shibdu, I'm going to write one word that really covers both, the mashma hachi umashma hachi. It implies both. Rabbi Yochanan Omar. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, remember we pointed out that this volcano shape represents opinions regarding the power that the girls have in terms of collection. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, echad zeh ve'echad zeh ein motziin. Whether it's for parnosa or for mazonos, they are not entitled to collect. Now, regarding Rabbi Yochanan versus Rebbe had said that they are motziin for parnosa, and Rabbi Yochanan is saying that they're not motziin even for parnosa. Regarding mazonos, though, there's agreement. Rabbi had said, ein motziin lemazonos. Rabbi Yochanan goes further, not only that ein motziin for mazonos, but even for parnosa. Now, it should be noted that Rabbi Yochanan was a generation later than Rebbe. Rebbe, in fact, was a Kana, and Rabbi Yochanan was an Amora. So this gives a little room for the following question. The following question lasts a couple of lines. Ibayalo. The Gemara asks, Li Rabbi Yochanan lo shmiya leha de Rebbe? Is it possible, or is it so that Rabbi Yochanan did not hear Rebbe's ruling, namely that motziin for parnosa? V'i shmiya le, and had he heard Rebbe's ruling, have a mekabele, Rabbi Yochanan would have accepted that and said that for parnosa motziin. Oy dilma shmiya le velo mekabele, or maybe Rabbi Yochanan actually heard the ruling of Rebbe, and still Rabbi Yochanan, did not accept it. Toshma. Notice that we have a long marking. The Toshma, the Gemara is going to then try to resolve this, try to prove that in fact Rabbi Yochanan did hear Rebbe's ruling. The Itmar, Misha Meis vehiniach shtei bonos uben. A man died, leaving 2 daughters and a son. V'kidma harishayna v'notla isur nechasim. The first of the 2 girls immediately collected 1/10 of the estate. V'lo hispika shniya ligvois ad shemeis haben. The second girl did not collect until the son died, and in that case, so the Yerusha falls to the daughters. So in this scenario, if we just use simple numbers, an estate that was worth $100 was left by the father, $10 were collected by the first daughter, leaving $90. The son that had been there died, of course, without any children of his own, so the Yerusha falls to the daughters. It's a case of an estate with only daughters, and in a case, as the Torah says, where there are no sons, so daughters inherit. Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Shniya Vitra. The second daughter, so she forfeits her Isur Nechasim. In other words, we don't say that she'll take 1/10 off the top, just like the first one did, and then they divide the balance. But rather, Vitra means she forfeits that Isur Nechasim, and they'll simply take the 90 and divide it equally between the 2. 45 apiece. So at the end of the day, you'll have one of the daughters having received 55 because she took the original 10, and the second one receiving 45. Let's take a look at Rashi. Vitra, we're looking at Rashi on the upper part of the narrow lines. Vitra Isur Nechasim, she forfeits her claim to the 10th of the estate, V'lo Amrinon, and we don't say Tital Isur Nechasim Tchila Kamoshanot Lazu V'achar Kach Yachloku. That let her first take 10% off the top and then divide the balance. Elazu Shekodma V'nises Zochsa. The first one that collected the 10th, she gets it and keeps it. Ubas al habas ein lo isur nechasim. When you have daughters that are left in the as heirs, the concept or the provision of 10% doesn't exist. When you have just a collection of daughters, they're all equal in terms of their inheritance. That's Rabbi Yochanan. There's another opinion on this. Rabbi Chanina, we continue in the Gemara where you see Rabbi Chanina underlined. Rabbi Chanina said, Omar Rabbi Chanina, Gedola mizu omru, Motziin leparnasa v'ein motziin lemazonos. Gedola mizu means even something more extreme in favor of the idea of collecting the Isur Nechasim has been said. Namely that even from Mishubadim, Motzian means to extract, take away from. So Rabbi China points out that it has been said, Motzian leparnasa, v'ein motzian lemezonos. That for parnasa purposes, we'll take even from mishubadim. We saw before that mishubadim might very well include even sold properties. The urgency of a girl receiving her Easter nechasim is so great that we allow her to collect even from mishubadim. V'yad amris shniya vitra, and you're telling me, you Rabbi Yochanan are saying that the second one forfeits. Now, did we ever hear this expression, Motziin leparnasa vein Motziin lemezonos? Yeah, we certainly did. This was an expression that we saw used by Rebbe above. Ve'im Isa, if it were so that Rabbi Yochanan had not heard of Rebbe's psak, then Rabbi Yochanan could have easily responded to Rabbi Chanina by saying, Man Amra, whoever said such a thing? You, Rabbi Chanina, tried to make a point how urgent it is to collect from the for Isa, how urgent it is for the bonos to get their Easter nechasim by citing some halacha, namely Motziin leparnasa. Well, whoever said such a thing? Rather, Rabbi Yochanan's not going to say that. He knows very well who said it. Namely, it's a psak, a ruling of Rebbe. So it must be that Rabbi Yochanan heard about it and was not makabel it. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan, it was where we see the second volcano. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Echad zeh ve'echad zeh," meaning even the parnasa ein motzian, contrary to Rebbe. The Gemara asks, maybe Rabbi Yochanan had not heard that ruling at the outset. And when he did eventually hear about it, he did accept Rebbe's ruling. The shiny Hassam, and the case that Rabbi Yochanan was dealing with versus Rabbi Chanina, that's different. Te'ika revach beisa. In that case, there was the estate was left to only the two daughters. It wasn't a situation any longer of an Isur Nechasim provision. When did we say there's an Isur Nechasim provision? That's when there are sons that inherit, and there are also daughters that need to be cared for financially. But where the girl is going to get a lot anyway, by virtue of the fact that she's a co-heiress, she doesn't need the Isur Nechasim. So in that case, Rabbi Yochanan says Shniya Vitra, because of this idea of the Iko Revach Beisa. There was a lot of money. Revach means a lot. There was a lot of money anyway for her. But in the case of brothers that are still present and they had either they sold their properties or they set them up as collateral, Rabbi Yochanan could very well agree that the girl, because of the importance of her receiving this financial allocation, she will get her Isur Nechasim, and we would Motziin leparnasa. Even Rabbi Yochanan would agree. Omar le Rav Yemar le Ravashi. Elo me'ata. If this idea of Revach Beisa is a factor, then Ashkecha Metzia Be'alma, the Iko Revach Beisa. If the girl finds a lost article, and let's just assume for our discussion that it's an article of value. So she finds something, creating something of value for her. Hachinami delo yavinon law isur nechasim. Are you going to say that also would be reason for withholding from her the isur nechasim? Omar le Rav Ashi says back, ano revach beisa mei hani nechnichsi koamina. I spoke about revach beisa, the circumstances under which we will withhold the Isur Nichsi is because there is great profit for her from these properties, from the same estate from which the Isur Nichsi would have been paid, so from therein she is profiting by virtue of the fact she is a co-heiress. But just because of some kind of outside profit, some outside acquired wealth that she might experience, that's not reason for depriving her of the Isur Nichsi. As you can see, a slash mark appears. That indicates that which follows is a new trend of thought. On the side, we have a nosei mivne heading, a bow tie shape appears. De ois bashe'elah. These are opinions regarding the following issue. Ha'im habas legabi ho'isur nechasim bal choiv oy yoreshes. Is a girl, with respect to the Isur Nechasim provision, the 10th of the estate to which she is entitled, is she considered a Baal Chov, a creditor, or is she considered an heiress? Nafkamina, there's a practical application of the distinction. The nafkamina is Lisluka Bezuzi o Bechada Ara. Can she be paid off with some cash or with one piece of land? Furthermore, ve'im hi balas chov, if she is considered a creditor, shalmi, she's a creditor of whom with regard to this Isur Nechasim? Shel ha'av, oy shel ha'achim. Is she considered a creditor of the father, namely that it's as if the father owed her the money, or is she a creditor of the brothers? Nafkamina, the practical, outcome or application of this distinction, legabi ligvois sheloi b'shvua, ligvois dafka ziburis. When collection is made, can she collect without needing to take an oath? The idea of taking an oath is characteristic of one who collects debts from left by a father, and the collection is made from the heirs of the estate. So if she would be considered a creditor of the father, and she's coming now to collect from the heirs, she would need to take a shvuah. She would need to take an oath that she had not received any payment till now. However, if she's considered a creditor of her brothers, well, they're alive, and hence you don't have the rule of haboli pora minichsi yemenu nifrel b'shvua, one who comes to collect from the properties of heirs. They're not heirs. If she's a creditor of the brothers, it's then that they owe her the money, and it's not a function of their benefactor having owed the money. And the second point mentioned is ligvois dafka b'ziburis, is the payment made to her. If the payment is made to her as a balchov of the father, then ziburis, we didn't mention, is a lowest quality property. When a person has several different qualities of property, so the lowest quality of property that they have is considered is called ziburis. So if she is a balas chov, if she's a creditor coming to collect as a result of a father's debt, then she would be collecting ziburis properties, because when you're collecting from properties of heirs a debt owed by their benefactor, they are able to pay out from ziburis. However, if she is a creditor coming to collect a debt that the brothers are said to owe her, then we treat her as a regular balas chov, and a bal chov collects from beinonis, middle quality properties, assuming that a person has several levels of property in their possession, and they're going to pay the debt off with land. They would pay from Beinunis for debts that they themselves owe. So now we turn to the Gemara after that comprehensive introduction. Omar Amemar, Bas Yoreshes Havya. With regard to the Isur Nechasim, the daughter is considered an heiress. In other words, when the rabbis enacted the right of a girl to receive 1/10 of the estate, she's receiving it as an heiress, not as a collector of a debt. Omar le Rav Ashi Lameimar. Ilu boi lisluka bezuzi. Hochi nami delo motzi lisluka. As an heiress, then that means she is considered she's the owner of 10% of each parcel of land. And therefore, if they should want to push her off, pay her off with cash, and force her, force her to accept cash instead, are you telling me that they would not be able to do that? If she were viewed as a creditor is interested in receiving the compensation for the debt that he had extended. But she's not considered a creditor. She's an heiress. That means she's the rightful owner of 10% of the estate. So does that then mean that if they were to try to pay her off with cash and force her to take that instead, they would not be able to? Amalein, that is correct. They would not be able to. If they were trying to lislukas to remove her claim, to push her off, to pay her off with one of the parcels of land, Hachinami, are you going to then tell me as well that since she's an heiress, and as an heiress she's a part owner in each property, each and every piece of land, she is a part owner, 10% of each parcel. So they would not be able to push her off by say, take this piece of land and all the rest we keep. Hachinami delo motzi misalik law. Because you're calling her an heiress, you're going to say they would not be able to make such an offer to her, to insist on it. Amalein, that's correct. They would not be able to do that because she is a yoreshes. Rav Ashi Omar Bas Balas Chov Havya. Oh, she's a mere creditor. In other words, there's a debt that's owed to her of 10% of the value of the estate. And if that be the case, so they could push her off. They can say, take the cash value of 10% of the estate, or take one parcel of land which corresponds to 10% of the land. Notice we have a long point now. V'afa Meimar Hodar Bey. Meimar himself, who was featured in the previous bowtie, he too had a change of mind to eventually hold that the bas is a balas choiv. Di'amar Rav Minyumi brei Rav Nechumi. Rav Minyumi tells us, Havekuimno kamei da Meimar. I was once standing in the presence of a Meimar, v'asoi ha'itzot lekamei, and a woman came to him, to have his kaboya isur nechasim, that was seeking out her 10%. The chazisei ledate, and I noticed, says Rav Minyumi, I noticed that as far as Ameimar's thinking is concerned, the boy lisluka bezuzi avamisalik law, that had they wanted to pay her off with cash, they would have been able to do so, showing us that she is the daughter, the woman, the woman in this case is viewed as a balas chov. Deshami me'achi dahavu ko'amri law. Rav Nechumi says, I heard her brothers saying to her, Ilo havolon zuzi salikna bezuzi. Had we only had some cash, we would pay you off with cash. The ishtik v'lo amar lahu v'lo midi, and Ameimar remained silent, showing us that he's agreeing with what they're saying. V'hashta the amris balas chov havya, and now that we're describing her as a Balas Chov, as a creditor coming to collect the debt. The question is raised. The Abba o the Achi. Is she a creditor of the father, who is now deceased, or of the brothers? Lamai nafka mina. What difference in halacha does it make to whom she is considered a creditor? The nafka mina, the practical difference applies. Lemikva lebeinanis shelo b'shvua, v'ziburis b'shvua. Mai, is she able to collect middle quality properties? That's beinanis, middle quality properties, without having to take an oath, or is she entitled to only poorest quality property and has to take an oath as well? Mai. Now, as we pointed out in our elaborate introduction, possibility one of the mikvah beinanis shel b'shvua, that would reflect her being a creditor of the brothers. When a person who, let us say, loaned money, he's a lender and the due date for the loan to be collected has arrived, and he goes to the borrower and says, I want you to pay up. So the lender's entitled to receive payment without having to swear ahead of time that he didn't receive anything till now. The idea of taking a shvuah is applicable when you're confronting heirs that they inherited property. They don't know whether their father had paid off the debt or not. So if the Baal Chov is trying to collect his debt in order to add a sense of certainty, of assuredness that he hasn't been paid off already, he has to take an oath. And not only that, the payment that he's able to collect from the heirs is from only the poorest quality property that they have. So the question then is she a balas chov of the father or of the brothers? Toshma, we have a response, and there's a little chart, a little family chart or diagram that one needs to see before appreciating what we're going to learn. So on the side there's a little star, and it describes Rav Ashi having some children, and amongst the children he has a bas, and we circled her. She's going to be the one coming to collect in this story. He has a son, Mar Berei de Rav Ashi, and he had another son, his name is Rav Sama. Now, you can see there's some slashes through the names and their numbers, so there was a situation that unfolded as follows. Rav Ashi's son died in Rav Ashi's lifetime. So you can see that Rav Sama died. There is a nechet, there's a grandchild. And after Rav Ashi's son died, this is a sad reality of life, that there are cases where fathers bury their children, and this sad reality applies to the most righteous of our people as well. And here you see, this is something that Rav Ashi experienced. Needless to say, you have, of course, the famous Gemara in the beginning of Brachos, where Rabbi Yochanan buried 10 children. An incredible tragedy. But we have to recognize this, and here you have this happening to Rav Ashi. And then after his son died, Rav Ashi himself died. Now in the Gemara we're going to see that when this daughter of Rav Ashi comes to collect her Isur Nechosim, she'll be collecting from the estate left by Rav Ashi. Where is Rav Ashi's estate? Well, it was inherited by Mar, his son, and it's also inherited by the grandson of Rav Ashi that you can see is called Nechet. Now she's coming to collect. When she collects from her brother, she's collecting beinonis without needing to take a shvuah. The collection from her brother shows us, this collection from Rav Ashi's son, without a shvuah, is indicative of her being a Baal Chov of the brothers, not of the father. So from him, she's able to collect without taking a shvuah. However, when she collects from the grandchild, that grandchild is in possession of the properties as an heir to the properties. It's his father, Rabbi Sama, that had been the Baal Chov to the daughter of Rav Ashi. He's an heir. So the girl's collection from that ben of Rav Samo, that's a collection that will necessitate a shvua. She'll have to take an oath that she had not received anything prior to this, and all he'll be expected to part with by way of land to pay her is the ziburis quality land, the low quality land. So now we take a look at the Gemara. After the question has been raised, Ta Shma. The Ravina, by the way, he's the one that oversees the allocation of properties, as we saw in the chart. The Ravina Agve Lebarte de Ravashi. Ravina enabled the daughter of Ravashi to collect. Agve is enabling her to collect. Mimar Braid Ravashi Beinonis Shelo B'Shvua. Middle quality property, not the cheapest property, but the middle quality property, without having to take an oath. Mibrei the Rav Samo Brei de Ravashi Ziburis Bishvua. However, the contribution that the grandson of Ravashi will make toward the Isur Nechasim, that will be made from Ziburis quality property, and only if she would take an oath prior to that. Sholach le Rav Nechemia Braid Rav Yosef le Rabo Ba Rav Huna Zuta Minaharda. Rav Nechemia sent a message to Rabba, the son of Rav Huna Zuta from Naharda. Ki asyo ha'itzo lekamoch, when the following lady comes to you, Agvo Yisur Nechasim, enable her to collect the Isur Nechasim, Afilu Mitztrabula, even from the base of the grindstones of her father's estate. Itztrabula, Rashi right across says, Moishev Amas Arechayim, it's the base of the one of the aspects of the Rechaim is a grindstone, Kamos Shehain, as it is, Umikarkoi Choshivlu, that base of a grindstone is fixed into the ground. It's considered ground. It's not considered a portable. And Isur Nechasim is collected from karka, from ground, from real estate. Omer Ravashi, Ki Avino, we continue in the Gemara, Ravashi says, Ki Avinon Bei Rav Kana, when I was studying in the yeshiva of Rav Kana, have a Magvinon Afilu Me Amlo de Besi. Rav Kana enabled women to collect their Isur Nechasim from rent income. The income from real estate has the status of real estate, as opposed to portables. And if you categorize a woman as a balas chov, so she's entitled to collect only from the real estate, or that which is categorized as real estate, and not from portables. And we continue now with a Maisa. There's a story. Of course, the story is related to the topic that we're dealing with. The issue of a woman collecting her Isur Nechasim and collecting from land as opposed to portables. The story you're going to see has a very, very dramatic side to it as well. On the side of the Gemara, we have a no-say topic heading where a firebox appears. Rav Onan is a central point in this piece of Gemara that will keep us occupied till the upper part of Amud Beis. Rav Onan is featured with this marking, Maisa Shekoshlin Vias Isur Nechasim, an incident involving the collection of Isur Nechasim, Shebo Rav Huna Ne'elav Al Yedei Rav Onan. We'll see that Rav Huna experienced a sense of embarrassment or shame as a result of Rav Onan. Vadvorim Higiu Lifnei Mar Ukva, and the case comes to the attention of Mar Ukva. Sholach lay, and did we note that we have this a long Maisa marking, so that you take note of the fact that this will keep us busy till the top of Amud Beis. Sholach le Rav Onan le Rav Huna. Rav Onan, through an emissary, had sent to Rav Huna the following. Huna Chavrin Shlam. Hello, Huna, old buddy. And I'm saying it that way because with that we'll appreciate the unfolding of the story just a bit more. So, because Chavrin is an indication of his being a colleague, a friend, on a very familiar level. So he sends, Rav Onan sends to Rav Huna Chavrin Shlam. Ki asya ha'itzo lekamoch. Like we saw before, Rav Onan sends a message that when a certain lady comes to you, Agva Isur Nifsi, enable her to collect her Isur Nifsi provision. Havi Yosef Rav Sheshes Kamei. Rav Sheshes was present, was seated by Rav Huna when this letter, or when this message arrived. Omar Le, Zil Eimole, Rav Huna says to Rav Sheshes, you go to Rav Onan and say as follows. Now, we're just skipping the bracketed section for a minute. The following is what you are to say. Onan, mimakarkoi o mimetatali. When you say that the woman should be allocated her isur nifsi, do you mean from land or even from portables? A second question. Man Yosiv Bei Marzicha Beresha. At a Bei Marzicha, who sits at the head? In order to appreciate the dynamics and the melodrama here, one will discover as the story goes on that Rav Huna was, we'll call him the greatest of his generation. He was the leading rabbinic figure. Rav Onan, in addressing him this way, was placing himself on par with Rav Huna. In reality, Rav Onan was not on par with Rav Huna. Rav Sheshes was in this story even a lesser figure who is being summoned or requested by Rav Huna to carry out the following mission: to respond to Rav Onan's instructions, and the way he phrased it, the way he addressed Rav Huna, you respond to him as follows with these two questions, but specifically in this fashion, saying Onan, and who's going to have to do we'll call it the dirty work over here. I don't know if that's a respectable expression, but who's going to have to do to do this, so say, unpleasant task? It's Rav Sheshes. So we mentioned just in passing that Rav Sheshes, amongst these three figures, he was the least of the scholars at this point in time. He was the youngest of them, if you will. So he's being put to a very unpleasant task from his vantage point to speak somewhat derisively to a greater man, to Rav Onan. And Rav Huna puts him up to this. So we skipped a few words. We're going to go over them again. Rav Huna said to Rav Sheshes, Zil Eimole, I want you to go and tell him, Ubeshamto Yehei Mandalo Omarle, and you should know that if you don't say it, you, Rav Sheshes, will be excommunicated. So Rav Sheshes' hands are tied. You can just imagine how he feels, and the Gemara will reflect his feelings in a minute. So Rav Huna is saying, you go, and you better go, and if you don't say the following text, you will be in excommunication. You'll pay the price. Well, the Gemara goes on, the story goes on. In the middle of the line, we see the squiggle line, Ozal, Rav Sheshes, L'kamei de Rav Onan. Rav Sheshes went to Rav Onan with a sense of trepidation. Omar Le, and he offers the following introductory remark. More Rabba, you are a great man. You would, let's say, if you have to rank things, you're considered my rabbi. In other words, you're higher than I am in ranking. Rav Huna, Rabbe de Rabba. But Rav Huna, he is even greater than you. He is the rabbi's rabbi. V'shamuti shomis man delo omar lei. And I want you also to know that if the following is not said, then he who was instructed to say it will be excommunicated. V'ilav deshomis, and if not for the threat of excommunication, I want you to know, lo havit ko amino, I wouldn't say the following. So Rav Onan this is just amazing how skillful Rav Sheshes is in dealing with his predicament. He's according Rav Onan the due respect, and at the same time, he's also revealing why he has to do this unpleasant task. It's not something done on out of his own volition. So that Rav Sheshes, as I think you can see, is maintaining the necessary respect as far as he is concerned. On, says Rav Sheshes. Mekarkoi o metatli. When you said that the lady is to receive her Easter Nichsi, did you mean that she should be paid from land or even from portables? Uman Yosef Bey Marzicha Bereisha, and who sits at the head in a Bey Marzicha? Of course, you notice that we haven't translated Bey Marzicha and we haven't done so deliberately. Ozal Rav Onan lekame the Marukfa. Now, Rav Onan has no gripe with Rav Sheshes. I think that's pretty clear here. Rav Onan went, however, to Marukfa. Marukfa was a leading luminary of his time, and Omar Le Rav Onan says, Chazi Mor Hechi Sholach Li Rav Huna Onan. Look at how Rav Huna addressed me as in this derisive fashion, Onan. Calling me by not without any titles, calling me like that, using my name twice, Viod, and furthermore, Marzicha de Sholach Li, he sent a second question back to me, Lo Yodana Ma'inihu, I don't even know what he's talking about. Omar Le, so Mar Ukfa says, Amoli, easy, we continue at the top of Omid Beis, Gufa di uvda heichi hava. Tell me, what was the beginning of the story? In other words, what had you sent to him to arouse this kind of response? Omar Le, so Rav Onan answers, Hachi v'hachi hava maisa. He tells him what happened. He said, I addressed him as a Huna Chavrin, a Huna old buddy, take care of this lady. Omar Le, so Mar Ukfa responds. He says, Gavra de lo yoda mai nihu marzicha. Someone who doesn't know what a marzicha is, Sholach Leila Rav Huna Chavrin. You address Rav Huna as your buddy. So we've been holding you in suspense. I'm sure you all realize that. And the reason we were doing this is to enable you to be in the mindset of Rav Onan in this story. But the Gemara, even though Rashi actually already revealed what the Bey Marzicha is, but we held off on it. Here the Gemara asks, my Marzicha, well, what is Marzicha? Answer, Ovel. It's a reference to a mourner. So the original question, or I should say the question that Rav Huna had sent to Rav Onan was, who sits at the head the head of where people are seated around, who sits at the head in a mourner's house? In a house of mourning, who sits at the head? So the Gemara continues after saying that, telling us that Marzicha is an Ovel. Dichtiv, the pasuk tells us this. Ko amar Hashem al tovo beis marzeach ve'al telech lispoid ve'al tonud lahem. The pasuk in the book of Jeremiah, in the Sefer Yirmiyahu, uses the word beis marzeach in the context of eulogies and comforting those that experienced a loss. So you see from the pasuk that the word marzeach is a reference to mourning. Now, we didn't actually see an answer to the question of, well, in the mourner's house, who sits at the head? Now the Gemara deals with that, and we recorded on the side under our nosei, our topic heading, Ovel Mesav Barosh. The mourner, he sits at the head in a house of mourning. The Gemara continues, Omar Rabbi Avo, Minayin lo Ovel shemesav Barosh. From where do we know that the Ovel is to sit at the head? If you try just to imagine things, of course we prefer not to deal with mourning, but it's a reality of life. We of course hope that the day comes that ubilo hamovas lenetzach, that death will be eliminated. But in the meantime, we have to deal with these things. And in a house of mourning, the prominent position, in other words, sitting at the head, the noticeable head position is occupied by the mourner. It's true that the mourner is probably going to be sitting lowly on the ground, on a low stool, but he's sitting at the head, which means that even if very significant individuals, even major figures, important individuals come in, they are not going to be occupying what's called the main location. The Ovel, the mourner, sits at the head. From where do we know this? So the Gemara gives us, as we go through the Gemara, we're going to see psukim that are cited. Shenemar, the pasuk says, we have this as number one. There's another source that is cited, and you'll see that Marzutra brings the second pasuk in. Shenemar evchar darkom vo'eshev roish ve'eshkon kemelech bigdud kasher avelim yinachem. That's the way the pasuk is read. In terms, that's how it's vowelized. So the pasuk is describing a situation of mourning, and it also says, "I will dwell as a king in his troop." Kasher avelim yinachem. Now, the Gemara asks, "Yinachem acherim mashma." The vowelization that is given to this as we read the pasuk is indicative of others, of coming to comfort others. So in following the vowelization or vocalization as is, it sounds like the mourners are coming to comfort others. Of course, that is hard to understand, and it certainly does not show us that mourners are sitting at the head. Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Yenucham Ksiv. And Rashi explains this, since in the scriptures, after the letter Nun in that pasuk, Yenachem, the word at the end of the pasuk, since an aleph does not appear, it enables us to re-vowelize it for midrashic purposes, for darshaning purposes. We're not telling you to change the way you read this when you read the scriptures for scripture's sake. However, in terms of what we can learn from it, we have some flexibility. Because an aleph is missing, that means it's not present in the traditional text. You can read the same Yud Nun Ches Mem letters as Yenucham. It means as he is being comforted. So when you go back to the pasuk, it says Evchar Darkam V'Eshev Rosh. I will sit at the head as mourners when they are being comforted. So you see from here that mourners, when being comforted, are sitting at the head. Marzutra number 2, Omar Mehocha. From the following, we see that mourners sit at the head. The pasuk says, "V'sor mirzach sruchim." Explanation: Mor v'zoch, someone who is of bitter spirit, and his mind is removed. He's preoccupied with his thoughts of bereavement, Naaseh Sar Lisruchim. He becomes like a minister over the Sruchim. The Sruchim are the great people that come to comfort him. So he becomes a minister over the great ones, which means that he would be sitting, the mourner will be sitting at the head. Omar Rava, Hilchasa, regarding the issues mentioned before regarding the collection of the Easter Nechasim, Mimekarkoi velo mimetaltali. They are to be paid to the woman from land and not from portables. Bein limizoni, bein liksuba, bein liparnasa. The collection from land and not from portables applies to all these different kinds of collections, whether it's for food support, whether it's for the ksuba, when a woman comes to collect her ksuba, and when it comes to parnasa, the issue of the isur nechasim, the dowry. As we go on, we see a new Mishnah. On the side, we have a topic heading, Abo shish lishmos avur bito, a father who had entrusted money for the benefit of his daughter, liknois lo sodeh, to buy for her a piece of land. Hayim hi yicholu loymar, does she have the ability to say, shiitnu hamois l'bayla, that I want the money to go to my husband? In other words, does she have the power to, say, redirect or re-instruct for what the funds are to be used? The father said explicitly, I want the money to be used for the purchase of land, and then the father dies. Can the daughter introduce an alternative instruction? The Mishnah, Hamashlish Mois Labito. Rashi says, Hamashlish Mois Labito, Rashi in the upper part of the narrow lines at the beginning of the Mishnah commentary, Mosar Mois Biad Sholish, a father gave over some cash to a sholish. A sholish is an assigned individual, literally a third party, but he's given an assignment to take the money to buy a piece of ground, a piece of land, or other provisions on the occasion of her eventual marriage. So that's what the father instructed to buy. That's Mashish Mosabito, and Rashi filled in quite a bit of information that the money was earmarked for the purpose of buying a piece of land. V'omeres, and the daughter says, after she says this, according to Rashi, after she's nises, but Tosfos has a different take on that and says that it's after Erusin, after she enters Erusin, the first stage of marriage, she says, Nemon Bali Olai. Rashi says, Nemon Bali Olai, Shelo Yakfeim Latzmo, I trust my husband that he won't keep the money for himself. Tanom Loi, Vahu Yikne Li Sada Kishertza. Give him the cash and he'll buy a piece of land for me when he wants. The Mishnah continues, Yaseh HaSholish Ma Shehu Shlish Biyodo Divrei Rabbi Meir, the appointed one must buy the land as he was instructed. And Rashi adds a point that will be seen later in the Gemara. Rashi says, Yaseh HaSholish Yikna Asada Vein Shomin law, we don't listen to her. The mitzvah l'kaim divrei meis. It's a mitzvah to fulfill the words of the deceased. And that the deceased had issued specific instructions. Rabbi Yossi Oimer. Rabbi Yossi says, he responds, he says, V'chi eino ela sodeh, v'roitza l'moichra, harehi mechura me'achshav. We look at Rashi, V'chi eino ela sodeh, v'chi matoi eles loy liknois, afilu ein kan mois, ela kvar nikna hasodeh. What value is there in the sholish going and buying a piece of land? Even if there was no issue of cash, but rather a piece of land was already purchased. And she wants to sell it. Harehi mechura. she can sell it. In other words, you see that ultimately she can determine what is going to happen with the piece of property. Hilkuch Shomin law, therefore, we listen to her. We continue in the Mishnah, Bamed Vamurim Bigdola. Under what circumstances is this? This is by an adult. Aval Bigtana ein Maisik Tana Klum. But with a minor, her doings are of no consequence, of no power. The Mishnah here, when it says Bamed Vamurim, the Gemara itself will ask, who is the speaker at this point in the Mishnah? Now the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanan, Hamashlish Mois Lechasonoi, Likach Me'em Soda Lebito. A person entrusts money to a sholish, to an appointed individual, for the purpose of buying a piece of land for his daughter. Vihi omeres, and the girl says, the daughter says, Yinosnu Bali, give the money directly to my husband. Min hanisuin horashus biyada. After she gets married, after she consummates her marriage, so she has the power to say that. The Rashi points out, Min hanisuin horashus biyada, she'afu avlo ola badaita lemoisro biyad sholish ela ad shetinose. Even the father's intention was to have this money entrusted to the sholish, the appointed one, up till her consummation of marriage. The Mishani says, once she consummates her marriage, Habal Zakai Lechol Peros, the husband has rights to the produce, to the fruits of the field. The source continues, Minho Erisin, Yase HaSholish Mashulushus Biyadu Divrei Rebbe Meir. If it's a case of she hasn't consummated her marriage yet, and she is telling the sholish, give the money to my husband, then Rabbi Meir says no. The sholish must do what he was instructed to do: take the money and buy the land, and not give the money to the husband. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Hagedolah, when you're dealing with an adult, the girl has reached adulthood, which means she's more than 12 years old. Whether the girl has consummated her marriage or even if she has not, she can call the shots. She can tell the sholish what to do. Ketana, a minor, bein min hanisuin, bein min ha'erisin, yaseh ha'sholish mashehu shlish biyadai. If she is still a minor, then the sholish must do what he was instructed to do. The Gemara asks, "My binayu, what is the point of difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi?" In other words, what case would they argue over? On the side, under the Mivneh heading, a triangle is featured, and there's the structural note. So, what do these triangles do for us? They highlight shlavim levarer b'machoikin Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. These are stages in determining what is the case over which they are arguing. So you see a triangle here, and in the middle of the wide lines of the Gemara, you can see a second one. So the Gemara asks, as we said, "My binai, what is the difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi?" The double underline is used to highlight the case where we are expected to see the difference. I could just tell you ahead of time, structurally, whenever you see E Lema, you know that almost all the time throughout the Shas, whatever's presented in an E Lema fashion is going to be rejected. It's essentially a long question. It's saying, and that's how we've noted the structure with a long question marking, when asking what's the difference between them. If you say that this is the difference, well, it can't be. The Gemara will reject this suggestion. So it nevertheless represents a stage in trying to figure out what's the difference, and it's suggested, if you say Kitano Mina Nisuan Iko Binayu, later you can see we have a different scenario or case highlighted. Later you see Gdola Mina Irisin. So in the meantime, If you say it's Ktana min hanisuin, iko binayu, that the case of a minor who has consummated her marriage, that is the point of difference. The Rabbi Meir Savar Horoshus Biyada. According to Rabbi Meir, she would be able to call the shots and the money would have to be released by the shalish in favor of her husband. V'yasu Rabbi Yossi Lameimar Afilu min nisuin nami. Even if you're talking about the nisuin stage, gedolin ketana lo, only if she's an adult, but not if she's a minor. Now, so if you say that that's their point of difference, Ema Seifa, then you're going to have to deal with the continuation of the Mishnah. And it said in the Mishnah, by the way, you can use your arrows, and you can align this with the arrow above. You see where this quote comes from. It said, Avol Biktana, when you're dealing with a minor, Ein Maisek Tanaklum. A minor's decisions and will is of no concern, is of no importance, no consequence. Now, later, after the bracketed section, but we're telling you ahead of time, this statement, Ein Maisik Tanaklum, is something accepted by everybody. That's what we've noted with there's a starred, single star comment that says, Mikanat Sof HaSheila, from here, from this point on till the end of the long question, Hagmar Tochiach the Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yossi Lo Cholkem Binyan Kana, that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir do not argue regarding the issue of Ktana. Now, you can see at this point we have a long bracketed section, and the double starred note says, Machos HaSugrayim, the purpose of these brackets is Laharos de Ad Kan Ikur Hadachi, up till now is the main, this is the heart of the rejection of saying that Ktana min hanisuin is the point of difference, because it's not. Betocha Sograyim Nimsa Haychacha, within the bracketed section, we will prove Taseifahu L'chulei Alma, that the Seifa is a statement that even Rabbi Meir subscribes to. You see, when you look back at the Mishnah, if you just read the Mishnah very, very superficial fashion, you would think that it's the continuation of Rabbi Yossi speaking. The Gemara will show that no, this statement is here to highlight that even Rabbi Meir subscribes to this. So it's l'chulei alma, it's according to everybody. Therefore, we're going to have to find a different point of difference to answer the question of my binayu, of what is the difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. And if we were to skip this bracketed section, we say Elo, notice the second triangle, how we skip this whole section. Elo gedola min ha'erusin ika binayu. The point of difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi will be the case of the adult, aged girl that is in a state of erusin, not a case of nisuin. Rather, gedola from erusin will be a point of difference. Now that we've laid out the structure, and I hope it's clear, we go back to the third wide line of the Gemara. After the Gemara, just to recapitulate, the Gemara said, maybe if you'll suggest that the case of Ktanamin and Nisuin is going to be the point of difference, do we listen to the girl or not? Well, then read the Seifa. The Seifa said, Ktana ein maisik tana klum. Ha man, we're reading in the bracketed section, Ha man kotoni la. Who wrote this? Who authored this? That ein maisik tana klum. Ilemo Reb Yossi. If you were to think that it's Reb Yossi who's the speaker, Ha meiresha shamis mina. But we already know that from the earlier statement of Reb Yossi. Dioma Reb Yossi, v'chi eino elo sadeh. This is what you see in the Mishnah. If it were just a matter of a field that was already purchased, v'hi roitze l'moichra, and she would want to sell it, harei hi mechura me'achshav, she could sell it right now. Gedoyla de bas zvini in, only an adult is capable of selling land. She's a bas zvini, means capable of selling. Ketana de lav bas zvini hi lo. A minor, she's not capable of concluding commercial transactions of land. so it wouldn't apply. So that Rabbi Yossi already excludes the Tana from his discussion. Now, once again, Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah is basically saying we listen to her. But to whom are we listening? We're listening to someone who's capable of concluding a land transaction. That's only a Gedolah, not a Ketana. So I know that Rabbi Yossi is not dealing with a Ketana. Elo Rabbi Meir he. The Seifa is Rabbi Meir. V'chisure mechasra v'hachi kotani. And as far as the reading of the Mishnah is concerned, read it as follows. Yasa sholish mashahush biyado. That was Rabbi Meir. Do you see where this quote comes from? We have a star, and it's basically it's a rereading of the brisa that we saw above. And actually, let me even be a little more accurate than that. This rereading is of Yasa Sholish Mashahush Biyado. This we saw in the Mishnah, and we have to account for the Seifa of the Mishnah, as we said earlier. So I just am correcting myself with regard to the Brisa citation. So that as we reread and add, because Chisuri Mechasra indicates that the Mishnah was deliberately abbreviated, so we have to fill in words of understanding, and we understand the Mishnah as follows: that we said Chisuri Mechasra Kotoni Yaseh Hasholish Mashahushlish Biyado, that you saw within Rabbi Meir's comment. And Bamed v'mamurim, when do we say Yasa Sholosh Mashahush Biyado? As a continuation of Rabbi Meir. Even though when you look at the Mishnah text, it's very hard to see this. You have to basically skip backwards. But nevertheless, the Bamed v'mamurim is a continuation of Rabbi Meir. Under what circumstances do we say that the Sholosh does what he was instructed? Min ho'erusin, avol min ha'nesuin or Rishus Biyado. If we're dealing with a period of time before the nisuin, before the consummation of the marriage, then the sholish must do what he was instructed. Bamed v'amurim b'gdola. And when does this apply? That min hanisuin, we say she can call the shots. That's if you're dealing with an adult. Avol b'ktana ein maisik tana klum. But when you're dealing with a ktana, the decisions, the instructions of a ktana are of no importance, no consequence. So that to suggest that Ketana min hanisuin would be a point of difference, claiming that Rabbi Meir would say she can call the shots, that we see is not so. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir would agree that a Ketana min hanisuin is not in the position to call the shots. Elo gedoilo mino erusin ika binayo. A point of difference would be the girl reached adulthood, but she has not yet consummated the marriage. According to Rabbi Meir, even though she is a Gedola, we would not listen to her. According to Rabbi Yossi, we would. Itmar, Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel says halacha ka Rabbi Yossi. Rovo Omar Rav Nachman halacha ka Rabbi Meir. Paskening like Rabbi Meir is based on the idea of mitzvah lekayim divrei hames. The father had instructed, buy the land, therefore you have to buy the land. And the reason for that, even though the woman in this case, she's a gedola, nevertheless, it's only mina erisin, so we want to bekayim, we want to fulfill the instructions of the deceased. Before we go on in the Gemara, we glance at the side under our nosei, our topic heading. Me'achar shehusker shitas Rabbi Meir, the mitzvah lekayim divrei hames. Now that we've mentioned the background to Rabbi Meir's ruling that the sholish is to do what he was instructed in the case of the gedolah min ha'erusin, based on the idea that there's a mitzvah to fulfill the will of the deceased. HaGemara via Maisa, the Ilfa, Gemara is going to bring us a story involving the Talmudic personality whose name is Ilfa, Shebo Humara Kaychisa V'Limud Torah, where he demonstrates his prowess in the study of Torah, Lamrot, in spite of the fact Sheparash La'asokim, that he left the world of, we'll say, full-time Torah learning in order to engage in business and income. The Gemara. Ilfa tolo nafshe biskaria de makusa. Ilfa went to the top of the mast of a ship with tall masts for their sails, and he climbed to the top. Omar, and he proclaimed. You're probably wondering what in the world is Ilfa, who is we'll see is a great man, what's he doing climbing to the top of a mast? So Rashi tells us, based on the Gemara in Tainus, where the full story is featured, but we're not going to get into the full story. I highly recommend anyone who's curious to go look up the Gemara in Tainus, and even to listen to the Gemara markings recorded shiurim on Maseches Tainus Daf Chof Aleph to see and to hear the background. However, as far as Rashi here is concerned, after his friend Rabbi Yochanan was appointed to be the head of the academy, Ula they had parted ways prior to that, whereby Ula engaged in merchandising, in commerce, and Rabbi Yochanan had maintained a full-time Torah learning schedule. After it could be years past, Ilfa comes back and he says, when he comes back, they say to Ilfa, if you had spent time and continued full-time Torah study, Rabbi Yochanan would not have been the one appointed, but you would have been the one appointed. So he gets the feeling from those present that they don't believe that he has maintained his Torah learning capabilities. So in order to make a point, he does the following. As we saw, he climbs to the top of the mast, and he goes on and he says, Ika da'osi da'omar li milsa debei Rabbi Chia v'Rabbi Yishia. If anyone would come and cite a source, what we call brises, Tanaic literature outside Mishnayos, that were brises, these Tanaic sources that were taught or formulated or edited in the schools of Reb Chia or Reb Oshia, and I would not be able to show you a source for them in the formal Mishnayos below Pashitno lei mimasnisen, and I wouldn't be able to show the support for the brisa in a Mishnah, nafilo miskaria v'tavana, I'll jump off the mast and drown. Well, that's a pretty serious offer, a pretty serious challenge that he is welcoming. Osahu saba tonole, and I don't know, in situations like this, you get a certain sense of a cynical feeling, or I don't know how else to describe it, that if Ilfa is offering to jump off the mast, and how someone comes to put him off the challenge, as if it's almost as if they want to see blood. But here we're dealing with great figures in the Talmud, so I would hesitate advancing such an approach. But nevertheless, the scene is fairly remarkable. So, okay, we hear Ilfa challenging anyone to put him to the test, and if he fails, he's going to jump off and drown. Well, someone comes along. He's called Hahu Saba, some elderly man comes along. There are commentaries elsewhere as to the term Hahu Saba, what and to whom it refers, but for our purposes, we're just going to translate. Tonole, and this Hahu Saba presents a brisa. It's a non-Mishnah Tanaic source. And the point is, after hearing this source, the challenge presented to Ilfa is to tell us who is the author of this, who is the author of this unnamed source, and by saying who the name of the author is, he's in effect going to be telling us it's so and so, and it's found in a Mishnah. And we'll you're probably wondering why is this story over here. So the answer is going to be it's because the Tanaic source is in fact our Mishnah. So now, what's the brisa that was put to Ilfa as a challenge? So the brisa itself has nothing to do with the issue of daughters coming to collect their Isur Nechasim, and they're instructing Shalishim what to do, etc. But it does have to do with the general realm of estates and inheritance. So you have the following cases. Ha'oimer tenu shekel livni b'Shabbos. There's a man that's instructing an executor to provide for his children, for his son, a shekel. It's an amount of money per week. Uru'uyin litain lohem sela. Now the shekel is going to be used to buy their food, and he's telling the executor to use a shekel. However, they really need more. Food is expensive there, and they really take them sell. It means in order to subsist, they need a sela as a coin twice as big as a shekel. Noisnim lohem sela. With the wording of tenu shekel livni b'Shabbos, that doesn't preclude the possibility of if they need more, they shall be provided with more. A second case. Ve'im Omar, if the father instructs, Al titnu lohem elo shekel, notice a slight difference in terminology or phraseology. He says, do not give to them anything other than a shekel. Ein noisnim lohem elo shekel. Then they are not to be given anything more than a shekel, even if they really need more. V'im Omar, if a man said, Im mesu, if my sons die without children, Yirshu achirim tachtehem, then I want what's left of my estate to go to others. Bein shomar tnu, bein shomar al titnu. The al is very terse quotes, al titnu ella. Whether the father used the phrasing that you see in number 1, or the phrasing that we saw in number 2, ein noisnim lohem elo shekel, then his sons are to receive no more than the shekel allowance per week. So that's the brisa. Omar le, Ilfa, upon hearing this, said, ha money, this source is in accordance with, and we continue at the top of Daf Ayin Amud Aleph, Rebbe Meir he. It's Rebbe Meir, and here we have to add Rebbe Meir of our Mishnah. Rebbe Meir of our Mishnah that said, in a different case, but he said that the shalish is to do what he was instructed to do. And we pointed out that Rebbe Meir said that even if it's a girl that's in a gedola, but she has reached only the erusin stage of marriage, the shalish is to do what he was instructed to do. And based on what idea? It's Rebbe Meir, the Omar mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis, that there's a mitzvah in listening and abiding to the will of the mace, of the dead, of the person who died, the previous owner of the estate. So that where a father, as we saw in that brisa, it said, I don't want you to give to them anything above or anything other than a shekel, even though the children are essentially the heirs of the estate, but when they're minors and you have an executor that's in charge of the estate, that's all they are to receive. You might ask, but if they need more upon which to subsist, what are they going to do? So they'll go to the public charity, or they'll go beg, or they'll set up a lemonade stand, or whatever, but the instructions must be carried out. That's this concept of mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis. Amar of Chisda Amar Ukva Hilchisa. The final ruling regarding that brisa is bein shomar tenu, bein shomar al titnu. Whether the father said, like in example 1, Or, like in example 2, Noisnim lahem kol sarcham. We are to give them everything they need. The Gemara asks, but did we not say that the halacha is like Rabbi Meir, that we are to listen to the instructions of the deceased? And he was very clear in his instructions that don't give to them any more than a shekel. So what business do you have ruling that you'll give them whatever they need? So the Gemara says, Hani mili ba'achrinaisa. It's true that mitzvah l'kayim divrei meis when you're dealing with others. Avol b'ha, but in the case of a man with his sons, meinach nichalei, the father himself is only too happy that they receive what they need. The fact that he phrased it upon before his death in this very restrictive fashion of al titnu ela, etc. He was trying to simply cultivate the character of diligence, and that they should learn how to be independent, not dependent on the estate, on money that others made for their own sustenance. And Rashi explains on the second line from the top, they should know how to seek out their own support and not be ravenous, demanding individuals. So for educational purposes, and only for those purposes, the father had said regarding his sons, al titnu elo, don't give anything above that amount. But when it comes to the actual carrying out of the will, and there's a situation that they really need more, so regardless of the language in the original instructions, the kids are to be provided, the sons are to be provided with what they need. Tanan Hossam, the Tanaic source appears elsewhere that says Hapautos mekhon mekach umimkoron memkar b'metaltalin. Pautos, Rashi says on the third line from the top, Tinokos b'nei teisha u'shmoina kedamrina b'nizokin. Children approximately 8-9 years of age. That's an age where children have a certain level of understanding. They're called pu'utos. And regarding them, it is said, Mekhon mekach umemkoron memkar. When it comes to portables, their purchases and their sales are binding. This is to the exclusion, by the way, of land. When it comes to land sales, we say that one has to be at least an adult. That's Rashi says Shiovi Shtei Cyrus, and if possibly in the absence of Shtei Cyrus, or until he reaches age 20. That's a discussion in and of itself where the age 20 comes into play. But for our purposes right now, in our shiur today, metaltalin being transacted and being a binding transaction on the part of minors is limited to metaltalin, is limited to portables, not to land. Omar Rafram, lo shanu ela she'ein sham apotropos. What we just learned in this Tanaic source is true only if there's no executor. Avol yesh sham apotropos, if there's an executor of the estate, then ein mekhon mekach v'ein memkoron memkar. Then transactions done by minors when there's an executor that was appointed by the father or by the court, then their transactions are null and void. Mimai, from where do you know this? Midaktani, from the fact that the Mishnah said, our Mishnah said, Ein maisik tane klum. The transactions of the Ktana are nothing. The Gemara asks, how do you know from our Mishnah the rule that if there's an apotropos that the sales of the minors are nothing? Maybe, like the case of the Mishnah, there was a shalish. A shalish is a person, he's not just an executor, he's a person that's given in specific instructions. He was told to buy a piece of land. And maybe when you have someone given specific instructions, we say that the minor is of no consequence. The Gemara says if that were true, if that's what the Mishnah thought, in Cain, listening, then the Mishnah should have said as follows: Avo b'ktano yaseh sholish mashahu shlosh biyodo. But when you're dealing with a minor, then the sholish shall do what he was commanded to do. But that's not what it says. What is meant by ein maisik tane klum? What is meant by that very general sounding phrase? Shma mino, the Mishnah is conveying the following: afilu ba'alma, even in general, namely, even if you don't have a shalish, all you have is an apotropos, an executor, even though he doesn't have specific instructions, but he's there to oversee the welfare of the ktanim, we say that ein maise hakoton klum. We've reached the end of the 6th parak. The Mirza Hashem in our next year will be zeicha to start the 7th parak.